And this was a very popular activity in the year 1960. It was a fad, and by the end of that year, some 70,000 people had participated in actions like this. The idea was that some black people and maybe some white people would sit at a whites-only lunch counter and refuse to leave until they were served, and that would start a fight. And they very quickly branched out into other areas so that you had kneel-ins at white churches and bowl-ins at whites-only bowling alleys, and this ends and that ends. And the effort was very successful. And I'm sorry, I don't have any summary statistics, but I saw a report that by October of 1960, desegregation of lunch counters had occurred in 112 cities. And they were also achieving success in all of these other areas. Also, what happened in early 1960 was that an organizing genius named Ella Baker created the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And she did that by getting the leaders of all of these sit-ins and getting them together in a group. So what you have now is a mass uprising with tested and proven leadership. And the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee was actually by far the most important force in what we call the civil rights movement. It was at least a major partner and usually the creator of virtually every development of the civil rights movement. So about 8 years ago, I tried to learn everything I could about SNCC, and today I'm here to share with you what I found out. There are two major areas where you need some expertise if you're going to pull off a mass uprising. One of these is that you have activism, and then you have legislation, or whatever it is you're trying to achieve. And you should have some understanding of how you get from the activism to the legislation, okay? You do some political action, and then this happens, and this happens, and this happens, and you need to understand that process. You need a theory that explains the process. And if you have that theory, you can manage it and maximize your chances of getting what you want. If you don't have that theory, you might have no clue at all about why you're not getting the things that you want. And there is such a theory. Thanks to an anonymous donor, I'm able to distribute this. There are copies out on my table. You can take as many as you like. Challenging Authority, How Ordinary People Change America by Frances Fox Piven. And she was or is a professor at City University of New York Graduate Center, probably left of center, but that's okay. And this is a very rigorous academic study of the process I've just been talking about. It explains how ordinary people change America. But I think it's a little too much for activists, so I decided to create my own presentation, and I describe that in my field manual, which is also out on the table. And I'll talk about it here too. So that's one area where you need some expertise. And the other area is really how to organize. Now, I love all of these things that are happening here out in all those tables, but to do a mass uprising requires an entirely different organizing method. And SNCC had that organizing method. People were brought into SNCC in order to use that organizing method. And I'm going to try to describe that here. That's also described in my field manual. And it is radically different from anything that I've seen in conservative and libertarian organizations. I thought you'd like to know the leader of that group was John Salter there on the left, and he was a libertarian. Okay, please give me your patience while I skip through these slides. Oh, Berkeley Free Speech Movement was a SNCC project. Martin Luther King and what was her name? Parks gave an award to the people that King thought deserved the most credit for the success of his actions, and they were SNCC people. These are representatives of SNCC, James Bevel and Diane Nash, who, by the way, was one of the people who drafted the bill that became the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Their fingerprints are all over the place. Yep. Okay, this is my 5Ds model, which is a simplified version of the book. It starts with disruption. And disruption means making things not work the way they're supposed to work. And I think the ideal example is an industrial strike, especially in an area like steel. Okay. And that's the Seattle educators strike earlier this year. And to tell you the truth, I would like to see the kids organize and go out on strike. And the disruption leads to disorder because people are in a situation where they no longer know what to do, and they become angry, and their performance is, let's say, a little less than optimal. For example, Jackson, Mississippi, 1965, the police were confiscating people's signs and American flags. Don't ask me why. They thought that was a good idea. And there's 5-year-old Anthony Quinn. He's just crying pathetically because he doesn't want the cop to take his flag. Have you seen that one? That was in the front page of the New York Times and in newspapers all around the world. And I'm going to say a little more about that later. Some people think that was the picture that got President Kennedy to decide to endorse a bill, civil rights bill. I don't know if that's true. Oh, there you go. I understand now they would send in F-15s. This lady, Gloria Richardson, had amped up the activism in Cambridge, Maryland to an incredible degree. And I think they were trying to tell her to shut up. And you know you've gotten into your mind when you're into their mind when you're not doing anything wrong. They still send in bayonets. Oh, I wanted to read this, something I found recently about that, if I can find it. This is 1963. By the autumn of 1963, black children were entering previously all-white schools. Bus transportation was desegregated. The library and hospital were desegregated, and a black policeman was promoted. So that's what happened after that picture. Before that picture, black people were not allowed in the hospital because of laws, and they had to go to Baltimore, which was the closest place they could find a hospital that would accept black patients, and that's a 2-hour drive. So all that was done away with. And these are just examples of some of the things that happen after you disrupt society. Oh my God. Selma, 1965, the black people came across the Edmund Pettus Bridge and the police pounced. And first they tear gassed them, and then the people tripped and fell over each other trying to get away from the gas. And then Ku Klux Klan people on horseback trampled them, and then they came in with clubs. And I think this was the one where John Lewis, the guy there on the ground, national chairman of SNCC, I think this is where he got his fractured skull. You can see the club coming down. That was just like beyond disgusting, which is what you want. Okay, now, as a result of your disruption and the disorder that you create, the public gets to discussing what's going on. Okay, so that's the debate bubble. And around mid-1963, the level of discussion of civil rights issues and black issues was at a level that I've never seen since. You had, in a 10-week period, you had 768 demonstrations or events of some kind related to race. And all the media were being saturated with stories. For example, this is one of my local papers, the Evening Sun, out of Hanover, Pennsylvania, the junk food capital of the world. And you have, look at that heading, 2 Negroes enroll in Alabama school. You know, imagine living in an area where that's a heading. And there's George Wallace. He symbolically stood in the doorway at the University of Alabama to keep the black people from getting in. And they were about to carry him off bodily. And you had NAACP leader killed. That was Medgar Evers. And you had another Wallace story. And then you had President Kennedy coming on TV and saying discrimination is bad. And the next day more of the same, next day more of the same. And you went to school and the teacher wanted a discussion in class about interracial marriage. And you go to church and the sermon would be about something King said. And it was just really incredible, and I haven't seen anything like it since. This is about something that I just started to think about. You saw that picture of the dog attack just a while ago. I started reading about this, and that's 15-year-old Walter Gadsden. And what seems to be in people's minds is that a bigoted cop sicked a vicious dog on a little kid who was demonstrating. Okay. The real story, it looks like, is the little kid's 6 feet 4 inches tall. He wasn't there as a demonstrator. He just happened to get too close to the dog, and I guess it was on edge, because all the excitement. The cop was a nice guy. The cop did not sick the dog on him. In fact, you can see he's trying to pull the dog back. Look at the leash. So what you have here is one big fairy tale. And I've been trying, and that's the statue that they have that commemorates the event. It's called the Foot Soldier of Birmingham, and you can look at the differences, entirely different stories being portrayed. And I'm trying to think about how we can use this tendency to make fairy tales to our advantage or avoid, being disadvantaged by them. Something to think about. And then it gets to a point where people start thinking that what we need to do now is KTBO, kick the bastards out. And the politicians don't want to be kicked out, so they start to think about making reforms. And around mid-1963, President Kennedy was being told that his supporters were walking away from him, that the Southern whites didn't like him anymore and they were going to support Goldwater or nobody. And the black people were walking away from him because he wasn't accomplishing anything. So, and all the Democrats were getting that kind of feedback. So it was time to do something. And, there he goes. He announces that he's going to submit a civil rights bill to Congress. And that's where you're starting to get changed. And then the last bubble is the actual dismantlement of the old polity and the creation of a new polity, one which will try to solve these problems that people are upset about, and at the same time keep the politicians in office. You don't want to be kicked out of office, then they'd have to work. And there he is signing one of the Great Society bills. He had the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and another one in 68, Voting Rights Act of 65, Medicare and Medicaid, gun control of 1968, immigration. Okay, now, excuse me a second here while I get organized. As I said, mass uprising needs to be organized differently from how these other things that we're doing are organized, because they're really different kind of beast. And okay, today we often have a national organization send a field secretary into a community or a campus, and that person says, hi, I'm John Galt. I'm here to start up a free speech project, and we have this free speech ball, and I'm going to be the leader, and I'm going to tell you what to do. And the SNCC approach would be entirely different. According to that approach, SNCC approach, you don't have to go into a community with issues to organize around, because the local people are the best ones to figure out what issues the local people will fight for. Okay? And there's a perfect example from the civil rights era. When SNCC went into Mississippi, many of them had the idea that they were going to be organizing lunch counter sit-ins. But they got to talking with local leaders, and the local leaders were telling them that they had absolutely no interest in lunch counter sit-ins because they didn't have many lunch counters and the people couldn't afford to eat in them. And they were telling SNCC that what they needed there was a voter registration drive. Fewer than 5% of the eligible blacks in Mississippi were registered to vote. And that was because the people who were in power did everything imaginable to prevent them from registering, up to and including murder. So they weren't voting. And the local leaders said that what they had was they had people who were upset because the potholes were not being filled in. And they had people who were upset because the street lights would burn out and the city wouldn't replace them very quickly. And they had people who were upset because they had a bad cop and streetcars too far apart. And they were all in their own little silo, like I think we are actually today. And they didn't talk to each other. And the local leaders had figured out that these people all had the same problem. And that problem was that they weren't voting. And to City Hall, if you don't vote, you don't count. And another thing, this John Galt guy that they sent in is not the real leader. Okay? When you started first grade, you quickly learned that some of the kids were more credible than others, right? And at any age, life is so complicated that we can't figure it all out using just our own brain. So we look to see what other people are doing. And the best people to emulate are the ones who they know what's cool, they know the ropes, they know what they're doing, and you emulate those people, and those are the real organic leaders. So what should the field secretary do then? Well, they should go into the community and try to find these organic leaders, as many as they could, maybe 5, maybe 10, and they should get them together in a group to talk, and they would meet and talk and then meet again and talk again, and eventually they would figure out what the problems are in their area and how to fight them. And then everybody else would go along with what they come up with because they're the organic leaders. Everybody follows the leader. And then the field secretary could pack up, go somewhere else, and do the same thing all over again. So that you would have somebody lighting a grass fire here, lighting a grass fire here, and that creates the mass uprising. I just found out SNCC only had 60 field secretaries doing all of this in the United States. Okay, so how do you find the organic leaders? Well, you start talking with people, just small talk, in the line at the grocery store maybe, or in the student union building, wherever people congregate. And another thing that they did, they went door to door canvassing, like some of our groups do, and the word would get around what they're up to, and eventually they would have a conversation with somebody that might go something like this, where the local person would say, say what brings you to Greenwood? And the field secretary would say, well, I'm here to start a voter registration drive. And then the local person would say, oh, do you mean like Cleveland Jordan? Cleveland Jordan. He's a plantation laborer, 4th grade education, 60 years old. That's okay. Tried to co-found a voter education project. Wow, that's good. Co-found. Okay. Often spoke about disfranchisement. Yeah, that's good. Church deacon, great knowledge of the Bible. If it's okay with him to get involved with SNCC, then it must be okay with Jesus. Neighbors took up an annual collection to send him to the National Baptist Convention. People look up to him, okay? They take him seriously. They trust him. He's an elk. Maybe that would help him get a meeting room in the Elks Hall. So there he is. When the field secretary goes into an area, he has just one job, and that's to find just one person, and there he is. And next thing the field secretary would do is, see where it says co-found. That means there might be more where they found him. And he had a son who was politically active. And his son knew somebody named Morgan who was politically active. So you start to milk these social networks for all they're worth. And sometimes it happens very quickly. You start to get these people coming into your organization. Okay. And then once you find enough people like him, you get them into a meeting, and SNCC had a definite method for conducting meetings. It came to be called participatory democracy, but if you Google on that, you'll get a lot of stuff that's not very useful. Running short on time, so I think I'm going to skip over this. I describe it in my field manual, and there's this book, Freedom is an Endless Meeting, which is very good. It's very dry, and you have to drag yourself through it. The basic idea is to take all these people that are diverse, they're all leaders, but they're diverse, different kinds of people, and try to find something that they can all get behind. And when they do that, because they're organic leaders, all the rest of the population will go with them. So I think I'll stop here. Thank you for your attention.